Hello everybody, welcome to another Fun Friday, and we're continuing in our theme of the Dystopian Wars game series at the moment, although there will be other Fun Fridays coming soon as well, now that I have a lot more time on my hands. But anyway, this week we are looking at the Imperium battle fleet. That is, for those of you who want a little bit of a translation, basically the Germans, and for those of you who are fans of Dystopian Wars from its Spartan Games days, these are the Prussians. So as you can see, they have something of an interesting design style, so let's have a look at the sprue that I got, which contains a cruiser and 2 escorts. So here it is. We'll call them the Germans for sake of ease of pronunciation, were always Mrs. Drack's favourite faction, so it's actually her fleet that this will be added to. Now, as you can see there on the bottom left there's one immediate special feature showing, which are these rail tracks, and the keen-eyed amongst you will also spot on the lower right of the sprue, although not all the way down, there is also a train. So what gives? Well, for those of you who have wondered, what would a German ship be like if they managed to mount a Dora cannon on it? Well, never fear, you can now find out, at least in Dystopian Wars, because, well, you can mount 2. And flipping it over, you can see the top of the escort's hull, and you can see there is also a little train track. And the implication there being with that little turntable forward is mobile. What you'll also find is that all of the bridges on the Prussian ships are either on their own rail track mountings as well, or they form a kind of flying bridge to allow the rails to move forward and back. So it seems that their sort of unique feature, if you like, is that they can quite easily swap out their ship's capabilities by docking presumably up next to some kind of dock that has a railway next to it, and rolling on and off different weapons via a truly modular system. Now, as with all the others, these do come in grey plastic. However, you'll notice these are a much lighter grey in the pictures, and that's because I remembered to use Grey Seer instead of Wraithbone Contrast Spray as a base. So this is them with the base spray applied. And so it was time to assemble the German frigates. They're called Arminius frigates. That reuses a name from the older ships, but turns out to be fairly easy to assemble. In fact, these were probably the single easiest frigates to assemble out of the Russian, Antarctican and German ones I've done so far. You have the single piece hull, you attach a pair of what are basically actually clip-on side gun batteries with associated funnels, and you drop the gun on the front, and then the bridge module sits on top of all of that. So it's only actually a 5-piece model, but it goes together very, very nicely and very easily. Here's my 2 just before I did the final assembly procedure. So you can see a little bit more detail there, the little railway track, etc. The cruiser was somewhat more complex to assemble, as you might guess, but still not that difficult. I don't know if these sprues were designed after the Russian and Antarctican sprues, if they took feedback into account from various people like myself, but if they did, then they certainly seem to have taken it to heart. I found this was actually relatively, again, simple to assemble, even though it was involving more parts. I found the best way of doing it was actually to take that deck where the rails are and slot it into the bow. That provided a rather nice framework, and then the 2 sides actually have, like the Russian cruisers, little notches that the sides slot into the bow on, and then once they've slotted into the bow and you've got that deck in place as well, it gives you 2 completely different lines of contact, which help it all stick together pretty easily, and then just apply the stern. The side batteries, again, have almost a push-fit quality. I think one of them actually was so push-fit, I put it in to test-fit it and then found it was pretty much there. So I was just like, oh, well, I guess I don't need the glue for that. The funnels come in 2 sections, and then you put the 2 sections together and then they slot in. Again, they have guidance notches, so very little chance of misplacing them, which is all to the good. And as this is a slightly larger ship, the entire bridge module also comes on its own little set of rails, which is quite fun. However, as you'll note on the bottom of the instructions here, you can build this cruiser in one of three ways. The actual starter set also comes with a battleship and obviously more cruisers and escorts, but I only got the test sprue, so just cruisers and frigates in this video. So I found this was the optimal way to paint the model. So keeping the bridge module separate and keeping the funnels separate, although that's because my particular colour scheme called for the funnels to be a slightly different colour to the parts of the hull they were sitting on. If you are choosing to integrate the funnels colour into the hull colour, then you're not going to have that much problem. But when you stick the funnels on, obviously the insides of the two funnels face each other, which could still make it slightly more awkward to paint. So this would be the recommended stage that I would say where you want to start actually painting the model. And here I've separated out the various weapons options. So you have the, what I like to call the double Dora guns on their little railway units on the right, and obviously those slot onto the two tracks on the cruiser itself. You've then got in the middle, you've got two gun platforms again on tracks, and those can fit either the arc cannon turrets down there on the front left, or the rocket launchers up there on the top left. There's also this train, but bearing in mind that as with the other factions, the sort of starter set that you get comes with multiple of this sprue, allowing you to build, different kinds of cruiser. The train is not strictly for the cruiser. The train is there as you get one per sprue, and obviously you get multiple sprues, and that is an option on the battleship. If you want to go for one of the lighter variants of the battleship, you can put a pair of trains aft, I think, instead of weapons. So the cruiser has a single, effectively, if you want to call it, rail mounting forward of where the bridge goes, and the battleship has two, one forward and one aft of the bridge, so doubling up on the firepower. And so this turned out to be my colour scheme. Now, as you might have guessed from previous videos and also from the fact I mentioned using the contrast paint, the Gracia contrast paint, I decided to paint all of this in contrast paints because I wanted to test how quickly and easily I could use them to give a half decent colour scheme with these ships. Turned out it was relatively easy, so once again, for those of you who are interested, I used the Dark Angels green for the main hull, then Blood Angels red for the red highlights, Templar black for the finishing and edging on the upper part of the hull, and then the weapons and most of the bridge unit was done using Basilicum grey, and then used a little bit of actual white paint to paint the little German crosses on there, and a metallic green paint pen to just do the little generators on the top of the bridge modules. Also, Skeleton Horde over the Gracia made up the deck colouring, and as a result that meant the entire ship was finished, or both ships were finished fairly quickly and easily. So you can see here, this is one of the cruiser options with the twin Dora cannons equipped. You can see there a little bit better, the bridge support units also sitting on the rails, but other options are available if you want to build your cruisers differently. You can have this version with the rocket launchers. Now, to be completely honest, at this point, this is obviously going more into the technical side of things, but I'm not so sold on the rocket launchers. The rocket launchers themselves do look fairly good, but they do look a little bit out of scale with this ship. They do look a little bit silly. I think, especially considering that sort of, well, not quite super firing rocket launcher is somewhat in the way of the bridge. I think if the launcher unit for these rockets had been a little bit lower, it might have looked a little bit better. Or perhaps the rocket launchers themselves maybe not quite as tall. But looking at the instructions for the battleship, I have a feeling that this was scaled for the battleship. So it's the weapons holding module on the rails is designed to be modular. It can go onto cruisers or the battleship interchangeably, and on the battleship with a much higher superstructure, it does kind of fit. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea for the cruiser. The arc turrets, on the other hand, I think those work quite well. I like the Duragun the best, but the arc turrets also suit pretty well the existing hull form here for the cruiser. The other nice thing about them, as you can see in the background, is that these weapons units actually genuinely are fully modular, as in you're not sort of picking something out and leaving it to one side and having it all at a skew angle or everything. They actually just do sit quite happily on their own, which should make transport and keeping them intact over time somewhat easier. Now, of course, as is traditional, since I have fairly large representative fleets of all the old Spartan era Dystopian Wars ships, how do they look compared to the old Spartan ships? Now, these are some of what you might call version 1 and version 2.0 Spartan vessels. The version 1.0, the original Prussian battleship there at the back, and the sort of version, I guess, 2.0, one of the later cruisers there at the front. And obviously on the bottom left I've got the train there. I've painted up in LMS colours because LMS is the best. Fight me. Anyway, now this is perhaps apart from the slightly odd-looking rocket turrets, this is probably the only other thing I'd really pick them up on in respect to the design. As I say, ease of build, fantastic. However, compared to the vast majority of Prussian ships that were around before Warcradle took over, these are the most different. If you've seen from previous videos, the Russian ships pretty much almost seamlessly blend in with the pre-existing Russian stuff, which is really nice for those of us who were collectors of the old stuff. Obviously, if you're getting into the game new, it's not going to matter too much to you. But the Antarctican stuff, it was a little bit different, but it was still very recognisably of a theme. And there were clear design inspirations taken. So, as I said in that video, they feel like a kind of Mark II variant. They still slot in together quite well with the old ships. These do look quite different to the bulk of them. Now, to be completely fair to Warcradle, there were a few sort of, I guess, version 3.0 Prussian ships coming out with the Spartan Games Kickstarter that was run a few months before the company itself unfortunately folded. And one of those ships, a big Gustav-class bombard vessel, which you can see now, which I happen to have a few of, that, as you can see, is a lot closer in design philosophy, even down to the, gigantic rail gun, literally, than some of the older Prussian ships. So it's not entirely fair to say that Warcradle haven't taken themes off of the old Spartan ships. It's more, I guess, that the Spartan games themselves were transitioning over to a new design style for the Prussians at the time, and it's this newer design style that they've carried through. Obviously, the most notable change there is the bridge structure, but overall, you can see a fleet made up of this kind of version 3.0 Spartan style actually does, like the Antarctican one, fit in quite well with the new Warcradle ones. There's also some fancy new artwork. So there's the first artwork, which you saw at the beginning of this video, and then there's this artwork, which seems to suggest we'll be seeing a German carrier of some description, and also in the background there, what looks like, from the scale of it, possibly a light cruiser carrier option, or potentially another carrier, sort of a small carrier option for the cruiser hull itself. We'll have to wait and see. And for those of you who are curious what a battleship looks like, here is one on the left done by Joseph Hillin-Keen, who kindly agreed to let me use his photos in this video. So that's the new Prussian battleship, or German battleship I should say, in this case obviously double ending with arc turrets, and on the right there is one of his ships of the older Prussian style. And he also has a Gustav-class monitor, and you can see, again, his one is painted up, how this design style is actually is a lot closer to the new Warcradle style. But for those of you who were somewhat disappointed that if you have a pre-existing Prussian fleet, you might find yourself looking at two very different looking fleets, fear not, because Joseph has also done another thing. As you can see here, in the background there is one of the cruisers, like my one, although I suspect his is slightly better painted. And in the foreground, you can see a old Prussian ship, but why does the hull look similar? Well, that's because he's managed to develop a little 3D model and 3D printed a hull converter. One of the main things with the old style Prussian ships is their hulls are actually quite low and shallow, not a lot of freeboard, but that does mean that a decently 3D printed hull converter can bulk them up to pretty much, as you can see, a very similar size and shape to that of the Warcradle one. So if you do have a pre-existing fleet, and you either have a 3D printer or you have access to a friend who has a 3D printer, or maybe just one reasonable 3D printing service available somewhere, you can kind of convert your fleets up as and when Joseph decides he's going to share the STLs, which he said he probably will be doing, and so you can have a commonality fleet. So you don't have to sort of sit there going, well, I've just got my Spartan Games versions and I don't want to change. Well, now you can have everything looking, roughly speaking, the same, which is quite nice. Something there for both old and new players of the game. So that is that for this particular episode of Fun Fridays in our ongoing Dystopian Wars series. Once again, thank you very much to Warcradle for sending me that test sprue, and since people seem to be generally appreciating these little videos as they come occasionally, I will continue doing them, I guess, for as long as Warcradle sends me test sprues, and or, in the case of some of the factions that are upcoming, I buy the fleets myself like I did with the starter set, as well as, obviously in that case, also being sent a complimentary copy. So, yep, hope you're enjoying them, and as I say, the Fun Fridays is not going to be just the Dystopian Wars element of things. I will be covering some other bits and pieces as and when people sort of request them, and I feel like making it. But thanks very much for listening to this video, and comments below. All good and fun to have a discussion.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.